It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to talk to you today about the economic underpinnings of content moderation. But before I dive into that, I want to tell you just a little bit about my background. When I was a grad student, I founded a community designed to be kind of like a permanent Chi reception, a community for media researchers that had a couple thousand members in 1992. And I didn't wake up in the morning and say I wanted to think about bad behavior on the internet. I just had to deal with it. You would think grown-ups would be better behaved. And then because that wasn't hard enough, my dissertation was 1,200 kids in a text-based virtual world, including a programming language I created to make it easy for little kids to learn object-oriented programming. And I had to deal with behavior with kids and safety for kids. So I kind of got involved in all these issues out of necessity. Just for laughs, I did a panel discussion at Chi 1994 on content moderation. I believe very much in participant observation as a research method, and I am an active Reddit moderator on r/Science and on the Georgia Tech subreddit. I am most honored that the students trust me to help out running the sub. So I try as much as I can to walk the walk, and I find that invaluable in my understanding of how these things really work. So I've been teaching this class, Design of Online Communities, since 1998, and I decided to write a book. Of course, it had to have a chapter on content moderation. And I had to stop and think, there's so much, how do I structure it? And I was really happy to see Lessig's framework, Four Things That Regulate, mentioned earlier today, when I decided to use this to structure this part of the book. My editor said, that was written, the first version, Code 1.0 in 1999, are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm sure. It's still the right way to think about things. So I used this to structure what I was writing. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that of these 4 points, we talk about the first 3 all the time, but we don't talk about markets half enough. And it ended up taking over in a way, and in fact becoming a separate chapter. So what I want to do today is to tell you what I learned about markets and content regulation. So I know you're all familiar with this, but just to review, Larry uses cigarettes as an example. Laws regulate where you may smoke. Social norms tell you that it's rude to smoke in someone's car. Technology affects how much you smoke, particularly the technology that nicotine is addictive. And markets affect how much people smoke. It's well established that raising the cost of the taxes on a pack of cigarettes lowers the amount of smoking that takes place by a predictable amount. So how does this all affect content moderation? I want to tell you that it affects it in 3 independent but interrelated senses. First, the cost of platforms, the cost to participate, is a filter for who chooses to participate, and what is posted. Second, the cost of content moderation fundamentally changes what exists on the internet in a very basic way. And third, the incentives that financial models create for platforms change content policy and also change how much we invest in both human moderators and in tools to make moderation possible. So let's start first with the cost to participate as a filter. Of course, if you have a high cost to participate, that's going to be a significant barrier to who joins a site. I love this site, Rich Kids, charges 1,000 euros a month and promises that the paparazzi will see your photos. you could also look at sites which are de facto have a high cost filter. For example, sites for luxury cars. My master student Vanessa Rude and I did a study of the Mini Cooper website, and you have to have a real Mini VIN to join the Mini Cooper website. And if you're interested, that's my favorite of my papers that people don't know about. What Vanessa found, which is completely fascinating, is she compared and contrasted the Mini Cooper site with the Campbell's Soup site. And she found that the brand image of the product shapes the content moderation policy of the site. So Mini wants to be freewheeling and fun, and yeah, you can say anything, and Campbell's is traditional values and mom, and we do not insult the soup. So you can check out that paper if you're interested. And there may be other extremely expensive sites that we don't even know about. I mean, if there's a very fancy country club that you could never attend, you drive by it and you know that it's there. I think there are probably very expensive country clubs on the internet that we don't see a physical footprint of, and that us plebes don't even know exist. So, okay, those are big costs to participate, but even a tiny cost to participate is a filter to participation. One of the earliest community networks, Berkeley Community Memory, which existed from 1973 to 5, had a problem with bad content, and they started charging 25 cents a post. And they found that it greatly improved the quality of content posted on the board. I love the Something Awful forums charge $10 to get an account. If you don't pay the $10, you get stuck with the account icon that says stupid newbie. So if you want to not have an ugly photo of a baby as your icon, you pay $10. Well, it turns out if you get kicked off of Something Awful, you got to pay $10 to come back. And you can come back as many times as you like. They'll keep taking your $10, but it does give people pause before doing something really naughty. Is this worth $10 to me? And we have a paper about Something Awful that I co-authored with Jessica Pater. You can look that one up too if you're interested. The second sense is the cost of moderation. Fall or Dodge in Hell is quite possibly my least favorite Neal Stephenson book, but I love Neal, but this wasn't his finest moment. But there's something in this that I think is brilliant. In his model of content moderation in the book is that rich people pay for a human information concierge who knows their likes and dislikes and sends them the content they need to see prioritized by their interests and their values, and with a high tolerance for what constitutes good content. Poor people in the world of this science fiction novel use low-quality automated filters and increasingly sink into believing in conspiracy theories. And I wonder if this is already our reality. Getting access to high-quality information costs money. And not only that, but distinguishing truth from misinformation takes education. So I still teach Design of Online Communities class every year, and the last assignment is a reflection on the future of the internet. And this is an assignment that was handed in to me about a week and a half ago. A student wrote, some of my close family members never went to high school and have relatively low ability to distinguish lies from truth online. They have sent me some of the information that they think will be helpful to me, but they are actually misleading and even discriminative. Indeed, the real information will then become a privilege of those educated and wealthy. I think that's unfortunately the world we live in. Now, we need to take a little bit of a historical perspective here. information has always been expensive. In the Middle Ages, wealthy merchants hired someone to go to court and learn what was going on in the affairs of the kingdom, and that cost a fortune. Knowing what was happening was absolutely a privilege of the rich. Even, the first newspapers, I think sometimes we fall into the trap of romanticizing in the good old days information was reliable. Well, the very first newspapers actually were often tabloids. They were struggling to figure out how to make money, and they sold sensational garbage to make money. But we are currently moving more and more. So quality information has always been a privilege of the rich, but we're more and more moving in that direction lately. The third sense is that the cost of content moderation dramatically changes what kind of sites are even possible. So a long time ago, I used to design internet technology for kids. When the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was first proposed, I went to a workshop like this about it, and I'll never forget the slide they showed. They had a picture of a site for kids that said, you can be a rocket scientist or you can be a couch potato. And the rocket scientist had a picture of the kid in a spacesuit standing next to a rocket ready to launch off into space, and the couch potato had the kid slouching in an armchair with a TV remote. And this was the choice they gave to little kids. And the significance of that choice was being a rocket scientist was giving your personal information to the site, and being a couch potato was refusing to give your personal information to the site. Really, you can't make this stuff up. So they passed the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act to stop those kind of abuses. Now, before COPPA was passed, creating fun interactive sites for kids was a huge industry. There were dozens of interesting sites, all kinds of fun interactive content, and communities where kids could talk to one another and interact and do fun things. And when COPPA passed, it all went away. Well, it moved to two different genres, okay? So they moved to sites funded by ad dollars, which could not afford to have any interaction for kids whatsoever because the money generated by the ad dollars didn't generate enough to support content moderation, either automated or human. And the other half were subscription-based services where they could at least afford to pay staff to do content moderation. So the financial constraints of content moderation changed the landscape of what kind of sites for kids even exist on the internet. I think sometimes we forget that the very shape of what we can do and do not have on the internet is content moderation is at its foundations. I don't know if any of you have seen this paper by Randy Farmer and Bryce Glass about how they fixed content moderation on Yahoo Answers. For those of you who don't know Randy, he was one of the architects of the very first 2.5D multi-user world called Habitat, which ran on the FM Towns machine in the 80s. So Randy and Bryce were hired by Yahoo Answers to solve their content moderation problems, and there's a chapter about this in Randy and Bryce's book. And what they did was to give people a reporting reputation. How good are you at reporting bad content? And they tracked that over time. And they said, okay, you report something bad, and if you have a good reporting reputation, we'll immediately take it down, no questions asked. And if someone challenges that and says, hey, why'd you take my stuff down? And the challenge is upheld, then that would reduce your reporting reputation. So the poster can appeal a removal, but most people don't because they know that on appeal, yeah, I know that was bad. I knew it when I posted it. I mean, there's some people who might just be confused, but most people knew that their content was inappropriate and never even appeal. So what did this system do to content moderation on the site? Now, you can't make these numbers up. The time to respond to reports went from 18 hours to 30 seconds. The cost of customer service went from $1 million a year to $10,000 a year. And then they laid off Randy and Bryce. Oh, well. A broken window effect may have played a role in how stunning these results are, which is that people quickly learned that Yahoo Answers was not a good place to troll, and let's go troll on other sites. Third, content moderation is fundamentally a business issue. So I will tell you that absolutely perfect content moderation is possible. Absolutely possible, if we have unlimited resources. Therefore, when you think about it, content moderation at its base is a financial issue. I remember at the Game Developers Conference talking with some folks who run massively multiplayer online games, and they told me that content moderation is their second largest non-fixed cost after bandwidth. It drives whether the whole game makes money or loses money. So business goals shape design decisions for online platforms. Now, this kind of makes sense. I mean, Facebook Meta is a publicly traded platform, and it's in your 401k most likely, and it's in your parents' 401ks. And they're trying to get the stock price to do well. So they make decisions that are guided by business values. For example, from a purely business perspective, it makes sense to invest less in smaller markets. You have big markets where you have a potential to make a lot of money through selling ads, and you have small markets where, yeah, this isn't really worth anything to us, but we'll let people use our platform even though we're not making much money, but we're not going to invest as much in human moderators for the smaller markets, and we're not going to invest as much in tools for the native language of the smaller markets. I mean, that makes sense as a business decision, right? I mean, it's just kind of a no-brainer. But what happens as a result is that you get genocide in Myanmar. They were not prepared. They made the correct business decision to not invest particularly much in moderation staff or tools, and this is what happens as a result. I think it's important for all of us as Westerners, or most of us as Westerners, to remember that all the worst impacts of failures of content moderation are in the global South, and the stakes can be much higher. You think we have little inconveniences here and there about what we can and can't see. This is a much higher stakes game elsewhere in the world. The dominant business model for many online platforms is targeted advertising. And I think we need to think about what incentives for design of platforms targeted advertising creates. Targeted advertising isn't an idea that has always existed. The Cartoon Network is around the corner from Georgia Tech, and a friend of mine at Cartoon Network who ran cartoonnetwork.com used to come talk to online communities class every year for many years. And he would tell the class about the invention of the online ad. When they first created it, it was a freebie they threw in with a TV ad. Shoshana Zuboff in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism documents the evolution of the thinking at Google and other companies, starting with, they began with the idea that understanding people's interests can help us make our service better. And that evolved to the idea that understanding people's interests can help us make more money. And that evolved to, hey, let's redesign the whole system to maximize behavioral data. This didn't happen all at once. It was a progression over time. So business models are a form of regulation. I love, in 2012, YouTube had what they call the Gangnam style problem. Gangnam style, the video was really popular at that time. And if you wrote a naive recommendation algorithm, thank you, Charlton, these things matter, that just said, take you to something you probably will like, everyone ended up at Gangnam style. No matter where you started, you ended up at Gangnam style. And they quickly realized that taking you to Gangnam style over and over was not a good way to keep people on the platform to maximize ad revenue. So they experimented with what's going to keep you on the platform longer. And they found that the thing that keeps you on the platform longer is taking you to more and more specific content and more controversial content. And as a result, they ended up quickly moving people to conspiracy ideas and to violent extremism. And they weren't trying to do that, but that was how they kept people on the platform more. Zeynep writes, YouTube leads viewers down a rabbit hole of extremism while Google racks up the ad dollars. So compare a subscription model to an ad model. They have different incentives for site designers. And those incentives for the site designers matter. They change what kind of system you end up with. Here's my assertion, that I believe that working to maximize ad views or maximize profits through other medium will never make the right thing happen for individuals or for communities. In theory, competition should fix it. So you need to make a platform that people like, or people will go elsewhere, except that doesn't happen in practice. There are too many huge platforms that retain people's attention even when they're not meeting their needs. Competition isn't working. I believe what we need instead is sites that are driven, whose design is driven by values. And we need to ask ourselves the question, what kind of world are we creating? Those sites driven by values have to have lots of alternatives so that each person can pick the flavor that suits them. And I'm not saying these are instead of large platforms, but an alternative to exist in parallel. And I believe these sites have to be nonprofit, supported in part by public dollars, so that they can say, look, we're not trying to maximize shareholder value. We're trying to create a place that has content that meets the following stated set of values. And when you join this platform, you read the set of values and you say, yes, this is what I want, or no, I want something different. So just to recap, there are three ways that markets shape content moderation. Any cost to participate shapes who participates and what they post. Managing bad behavior is shaped by cost and fundamentally changes what kinds of sites exist. And business models shape site design and site priorities. The improvements in content moderation are going to be multidimensional. I believe we need these new nonprofit platforms driven by values. We need educational initiatives to support the development of savvy readers. We need government regulation, as we heard is possibly happening in the EU. Was very exciting to hear about first thing this morning. But in everything, money matters. And it drives what's happening in ways that are pervasive. And if you get in the habit of looking for the money, you will find it there. So I want to thank you all for the invitation to be here with this amazing group. I thank my students, thank my sponsors, and thank you for listening.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. Just on this last point that you were bringing up about thinking about sort of as an alternative to sites driven by the advertising model and profit, I'm thinking about how these sites can sort of feel like we're addicted to them, like they're sort of like drugs, and like the YouTube recommendation algorithm offering up more and more sort of extreme videos can keep people on there, and sort of by choice, even though it's not good for society or good for the people individually, they're still choosing to like watch that next video. Do you have any thoughts about how, if we have these sort of non-profit sites driven by different values, how do we incentivize users to sort of switch over to sort of going towards those sites instead of the sites that we have now?
I think it's a social process. And like any online community design process, the hardest part is the cold start. If you can consciously organize a group of people to all move in a particular direction, hopefully they'll bring in people in their social networks. But the cold start problem is always incredibly hard. And I do think small platforms are going to be different than big ones, and people might end up using both, using them in a complementary fashion. I don't know, after it was announced that Elon Musk was buying Twitter, a whole bunch of friends got on hci.social Mastodon instance, and I have to confess that I signed up and I haven't opened it. So there's the cold start problem for you right there. I think it's hard, there's no question. So the students read the last chapter of my book and wrote their final reading reflection partly about that. And a bunch of them said, I don't think that's really going to work, Professor. And I thought, yeah, okay, it's hard. I'm not deluding myself. It's hard.
I also did the same thing with Mastodon. I created an account, and that's as far as I got. I wanted to ask specifically about this reporting reputation idea that you talked about. And I'm wondering if you have knowledge of YouTube Heroes, or do you remember YouTube Heroes?
No, tell me about it.
Okay, so YouTube Heroes was a thing where in 2016, YouTube said, like, we want users to we want to gamify reporting. And we want it to create trusted users. Like, we want users who do particularly well at reporting will score certain points, and then your reports will be treated more seriously, and look, you can get these badges. And they were very excited about this idea of, like, great, we are going to democratize reporting, and similarly, as you were talking about with Yahoo Answers, kind of raise up the best people. And there was this huge public backlash to it, saying YouTube wants us all to be narcs. This is like, how am I supposed to trust these people I don't even know with removing it? And I guess I wonder, I'm curious about like some of these content moderation strategies that you talk about that empowering users, like also working at scale, right? Like we think.
Right. So I mentioned that I'm a mod on our science. We have something like 22 million subscribers. Our subscription policies are crazy strict. We are not fooling around. To be posted on Our Science, it must be a peer-reviewed article in a journal with an impact factor higher than 1.5, published in the last 6 months. Yes, I spend my free time looking up impact factors, particularly for articles that annoy me and I would like to have a reason to get rid of. Now, does this policy annoy some people? Of course it does. So one of our former mods created a new sub, r/sciences, with a much looser content moderation. I love Reddit because the design lets you do that. To say, okay, you don't like the R Science content policy? Start your own sub. And you know what? R Sciences has a few 100,000 members. It doesn't have 20 million, but it has a few 100,000. So and that's, I think, a good model for, yeah, okay, the mods here are terrible, go somewhere else. But it's got to be easy to go somewhere else and easy to create somewhere else.
So whoever put Tarleton and your talks together, that was very clever. And I see all sorts of wonderful connections, and my head is kind of fizzing, so I'm not sure I can get my question coherent. But I did want to mention, in contrast to YouTube Heroes, a place where this kind of reputation is still going, as far as I know, is Slashdot, right? Where you get karma based on how well you rate posts as very good or very bad. Now, it's interesting in the light of Tarleton's talk to sort of think about how YouTube Heroes was about what he called moderation, actually blocking stuff, whereas on Slashdot, you're just influencing a number that affects the ranking, so it's more like a recommendation thing. So that's exactly to what Tarleton was talking about. But you said at the beginning, you mentioned at the beginning of your talk these sort of four categories, or these four instruments, and you brought up the cigarette taxes as a market instrument, as a way to sort of discourage without banning. And it got me wondering about how that relates again to Tarleton's notions of recommendation as sort of soft, right? So downranking is also a way of discouraging without banning. Now, it doesn't have any dollars associated with it, but now it's attention economies, right? So is Tarleton sort of playing with the market there of attention, or is it in one of the other three categories of instruments that you talked about? But finally, arriving at my core concern, what do the platforms, we allow the government to discourage. We give them the right to say we don't want people smoking and so on and so forth. When did we decide that the platforms have, I mean, we know they have an economic interest in manipulating their members to get more dollars, but when did we decide that they had a right to do that, or to what amount they had a right to do that?
Thank you, David, for triggering my favorite rant. You know that hate speech is illegal in most of the world, but legal in America because we are so nervous about letting people letting the government make decisions about what content is appropriate, that we don't want to let the government make those decisions on our behalf, and we say, let's counter bad speech with more speech. But what happened de facto, so we're too nervous to let our democratically elected government make those decisions for us, but we're somehow comfortable letting Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg make those decisions for us. That doesn't make any sense at all. The system is broken in a deep sense. And Mark Zuckerberg is making those decisions based on his imperative as leader of a publicly traded company that is in your 401k fund. Even more mind-bogglingly, only interested in next quarter's results and not in the results 3 years from now. That is not what we wanted. We're in a completely broken situation. So did we want Mark Zuckerberg to decide what's right and what's wrong? No, we did not. How about we say we are creating on our new HCI Mastodon instance an HCI collective, which has the following scholarly values, has the following values for mutual respect and decorous behavior and inbounds and out of bounds. And we as a community create a set of rules. And if you want, you can join that group and we can change the rules as time goes on. So that's the new model that I'm proposing, and that it don't make no sense to the markets are a lie. The idea that maximizing shareholder value will somehow make the right thing happen is just false.
All right, well, I'm going to slightly switch gears. So I thought one of the more interesting themes of Fall or Dodge in Hell was the lesson that we all, even as complete pleb users, you know, who are just average people, have more power to shape the world around us than we might otherwise think. And we all live in sort of our own self-constructed worlds a little bit, partially self-constructed out of our own biases, but then that's also reinforced by the surroundings that are given to us. And so I guess I'm curious if you have any advice for us average plebeians who are not in charge of social media sites, but are worried about the same kinds of things that your student was worried about, you know, I get recommendations from articles for my family and, you know, they've clearly gone down a very different rabbit hole than me. So I'm curious if you have recommendations on how us plebs can shape the world around us in a more informationally constructive way?
The short answer is read the book. Yes, it's in the book. So the chapter 8 is how can we help the internet to bring out the best in us all, and it has 2 different sets of recommendations. One for people who design sites, and one for just members. I mean, there's some obvious stuff and some more subtle stuff. Some of the obvious stuff is things like, remember, you're always setting an example for everyone else. Remember to make savvy choices about where you go. You lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. Go nicer places. Make smart choices about what you expose yourself to, and set a positive example for everyone when you get there. And there's more in the book.
So thanks very much for a really good talk. So I guess I'd like to question your your categorical statement that competition doesn't work and markets don't work. Because it seems to me that things are changing in the social media world, and that 10 years ago, Facebook was really dominant and looked really unstoppable, and now it's much diminished, I think. It's been demonized as public enemy number 1, I think a bit too much in some cases. I think it's been blamed for things that actually other bad actors were more at fault for. But in any case, it does seem like basically as a juggernaut, commercially and culturally, Facebook is over. So isn't that sort of an indication that, at least to some extent, competition and markets in social media products is working?
You are correct that I have overstated it, but I think incentives matter. And the problem is that, by the way, you will notice this last slide is still up. My work is sponsored by Meta, and and I love those guys. A lot of them are just wonderful people who care passionately about users. And the wonderful design work they do ends up being thrown away by management who are making decisions to ignore what the design staff and research staff have figured out.
But that's a different problem.
Yeah, there may be some improvement from markets. It's still the case that we did a paper on I have a student whose dissertation, Michael Ann Thomas, was about the internet in Cuba, and the users will tell you that Facebook and the internet are the same thing in Cuba. People don't even know the difference. They don't, and there's a whole portions of the world where they literally don't know the difference.
But in the case of Cuba, isn't that in part because there's a lack of a market economy, and so there wasn't as much?
I'm saying all around the world, Facebook is not dead, Joan.
Oh no, it's not dead. I'm just questioning the idea.
Have they taken it down a small notch? Of course.
Yeah.
But
I'm questioning the idea that users, that people who actually use social media and who are the targets of all this advertising, have no say over anything. I think we do have a say over some things, and it.
Absolutely, and I think maybe we agree, because the conclusion of the book is make smarter choices. Okay. Go to places. Okay. But we need to push people to make smarter choices. And I don't think the management of companies, particularly advertising-driven, I think subscription-driven is not as bad, but ad-driven revenue models drive management to make dumb decisions.
So I'll ask a question then, kind of related to what Joan was saying. One possibility is reduce the profit incentive. What about the case of like switching from an ad-driven model where everything is about engagement and attention, and to like a paid model more? If in some universe, if this was possible. Like if I'm paying for it, would that be a better world? I'm thinking like some models, National Public Radio, I pay for it, and I feel like it gives better content than, an ad-driven version. And there's some examples in like the 25-cent charge where the economics actually help the situation. So do you
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you, David. I'm on the board of my local NPR station. I think their model is scalable. Their model could work. Yes, a subscription-based model is perhaps creates better incentives for site designers than ad revenue-based models. Really, what I'm objecting to is what Zuboff called surveillance capitalism is the problem. But a subscription model is okay, modulo the fact that we can't let information become the privilege of the wealthy, and we still need some. People can still listen to NPR without paying at pledge drive. So I think a model like that is something to think about.
Okay, last question.
Yeah, I just had to pick up on this last discussion because, like everybody, I would love to see us move from an ad model to a subscription model. But I don't think that solves the problem because a subscription model is still an engagement model. It's still a model where the company makes money by keeping you on the site. And so I'd like to draw a distinction between that and PBS, or a utility model where the company operates regardless of whether you're on the site and therefore doesn't have the incentive to manipulate your attention and keep you there. Of course, the problem with the utility model is the problem with utilities. They tend to not be very efficient and so on.
So, David, after 15 years of board meetings for my local NPR station, I can tell you that they sound a whole lot like a traditional business when they're thinking about what they're trying to do. They're trying to get eyeballs. They're trying to get underwriting, also known as advertising. So let me just say that that model is a little more traditional than it might seem on the surface. Did anybody here remember back before World of Warcraft did its redesign? Did you have students who failed your class, David? And I used to have students. If someone was failing my online communities class, I could walk up to them and say, "So, what level are you?" World of Warcraft did a redesign with the explicit purpose of better work-life balance for players. One of the things they found is that it was taking people too long to find a balanced team to go adventuring. Why we can't find a cleric. We can't go without a cleric. If you spend 2 hours looking for a cleric who's level 42 or somewhere near level 42, then once you start playing, you want to play for at least 4 to 6 more hours because it took you 2 darn hours to find the cleric, right? So they created an interface that says, oh, you need a cleric, have a cleric, level 42, ready to play with you, go, right? They made all the dungeons doable in only 1 hour. They woke up in the morning and said, people are failing Amy's class. Let's fix it. And that was based on a subscription model. And what they wanted, based on a subscription model, was for people to be excited enough to pay the monthly fee. And the incentive on them is actually, because bandwidth costs money, to have them the minimum amount of engagement to keep them paying and on the site less. And that would maximize their profit. The incentive is just healthier. Thank you all very much.